In this case, we are going to be looking at the problem of informality in the city of Medellin, Colombia. The lessons we will be drawing from this case concern how you can use your causal map to develop a set of theories of change that will then become the basis of possible solutions to the policy problem you're trying to solve. Informality was widespread in many developing countries and is one of the important reasons why they have problems generating jobs and economic growth. In many countries, 60, 70, or even a higher percentage of the labor force are in the informal economy, meaning that they are working for businesses that have not been formally registered with the government. Workers, who are often the owners of such businesses, typically pay no taxes, receive no benefits like health insurance or pensions, and cannot borrow money or use their assets as collateral. The case we are reading revolves around the strategies that Federico Restrepo, the city's Secretary of Planning, could use to convince informal businesses to formalize. There are many reasons why he should want to do this. Informal businesses tend to remain very small. Because they are not legal entities, they cannot enter into contracts with suppliers, distributors, or to get financing from banks. They often have to accept payment in cash. If they are cheated or they get into a dispute with a customer or another business, they will not have access to the court system. The former chief economist of the Inter-American Development Bank argues, in fact, that despite good macroeconomic policies in recent decades, the country of Mexico has failed to grow because so many of its businesses are informal. The average size of Mexican businesses has actually fallen in recent years. In order for Mr. Restrepo to understand how to encourage formalization, he needs to understand why businesses in Medellin remain informal. We need to draw a causal map, the third item in the first circle of the policy problem-solving framework. This causal map needs to build on the contextual knowledge we have gained of the particular history and situation of Medellin. For example, the pervasiveness of violence and narco-trafficking that has strongly affected the ability to do business there. Once we have a causal map, we can move on to identify a theory or theories of change, that is, causal paths that will change the behavioral outcomes we seek. Let's begin by drawing a causal map for why businesses don't want to comply with the existing law, which says that they should register as formal businesses. There were three basic groups of reasons for non-compliance. The first was beliefs that explained why people don't want to comply. People may not know how to comply, or they could misunderstand the rules. They could have values that prohibited them from complying, and there could be peer effects, where they simply imitated the non-compliant behavior of those around them. The second category has to do with incentives that explain why people couldn't afford to comply. Compliance is often expensive in terms of fees, taxes, and other obligations. Businesses may feel that the sanctions for non-compliance were not that steep, or they may feel that the government had no way of monitoring their behavior. Like, have you ever gone over the speed limit on a highway? Or that the likelihood of being caught was not all that great. A final reason for non-compliance has to do with individual capacity. Some people might be prevented from complying because they are physically unable to or were threatened by others who didn't want them to comply. Let's then consider some of the specific reasons that the people in Medellin didn't formalize their businesses. Under the heading of beliefs, the procedures for getting a business license were opaque and complex, often involving several different offices and multiple documents. Another problem was the generally low level of trust in government. People may have felt that government officials were corrupt or incompetent. Alternatively, they may have felt the government never did anything for them, so why should they play by its rules? Finally, if you live in a neighborhood where everybody is informal, you wonder why you should break ranks and be the first one to get a business license. Sometimes obeying the law will incite hostility or even violence from your neighbors. There are many economic incentives for not formalizing your business. Being formal usually means having to pay extra costs like health insurance for your workers, overtime pay, a minimum wage, or Social Security. Formal businesses are taxed, so tax evasion is a clear motive for staying informal. And finally, up to now, the government has not been enforcing the rules on the books, so you may think that you can continue to get away with disobeying the law. In the third category of capacity, the dominant fact of life in Medellin at the time of this case was criminal violence. Drug gangs made money extorting small businesses and were much more certain to enforce non-payment than was the state. Narco-traffickers might actively target citizens that they thought were too close to the government as informants. In the background video, we noted that many people living in Medellin's barrios physically were unable to get to work. They lived high up in the hillsides and could not get to the public transportation and regular jobs that were in the wealthier parts of the city. We need to build our causal map by continually asking why. Why is it hard to understand procedures needed for a business license? One reason is red tape and the multiple certifications for safety, health, environmental issues, notaries, and the like that different government agencies impose. Low trust in government is the result of years of experience with poor quality government services, or indeed absent government in many marginalized neighborhoods. Weak capacity also explains the government's inability to enforce rules. Not enough inspectors, data, vehicles, and the like. And finally, there are multiple causes for Medellin's violence. The violence is driven by the drug trade and ultimately by demand for drugs from North America. Another underlying reason is poverty and the lack of legal opportunities. That poverty was in turn driven by migration from people from the countryside into the city, by poor education that leaves people without skills to get decent jobs. The government's lack of capacity is a byproduct of its lack of adequate tax revenues, which in turn is a partial result of businesses not paying their taxes. So we come around full circle. It is at the same time a cause of the underfunding of education. We can now use the causal map that we have built to come up with ideas for how to change the behavior of informals in Medellin. In your groups, you should discuss the different motives for non-compliance and the ways in which the city can take actions that will reduce informality. Use this slide as a guide for framing different policies to encourage citizens to formalize their business.